Welcome to Deep Look, Ultiworld's weekly radio show about the current state of Ultimate. I'm the host and the editor of Ultiworld, Charlie Eisenhood. Joining me is Ultiworld senior editor Keith Raynor. Keith, I didn't miss an episode, but I did get a vacation in between last week's show and this week's show. So I don't know if I look any more tan. I don't really feel like I do, but I at least got to enjoy some sunshine.
Charlie, did you step off the plane in your flip-flops and immediately jump onto the podcast? Is that what we're getting here?
Almost. You
got sand still on your feet?
Luckily, I had a light jacket with me to put on, and it wasn't as cold in New York as it had been when I left. But kind of a cruddy gray day here. Right back into it. So,
well, did you miss your San Francisco 49ers? Getting a win in the NFL playoffs.
What a dub. That was one of the most stressful sporting games that I've ever watched. I did not miss it. I watched the first half at my hotel room, and I watched the second half at a sports bar down the street, and was sitting there with some other 49ers fans and having a grand time.
The refs played a great game. The refs were very good.
Give me a break right now, okay? Look, if you're going to run the ball in the middle of the field with 14 seconds on the clock, and you're going to run it like 15 yards, like Dak Prescott did, you are obviously running the risk of not being able to get another snap off. And they didn't allow the referee to get to the ball. Stupid. I don't want to hear anything. That was the most undisciplined game. I have no
sympathy for them.
That was the most undisciplined game I've ever seen from an NFL team. I mean, just for a playoff team, the Cowboys are a good team, but they made so many penalties and mistakes and like blatantly obvious holds and stuff. I have no sympathy. Cry, Cowboys fans. Cry.
Tough weekend for me watching football. We'll leave it at that. But congratulations on your team advancing, and congratulations to anybody who was like rocking with Eli Mitchell in DFS or something like that.
How are you feeling about the Niners' chances against the Packers, Keith?
I am way cooler on the Packers than the general public, so I like it. I like the Niners. I don't like them necessarily like to win at like even money or whatever, but I definitely think it upsets potential here.
We shall see.
Got to have Jimmy G be top of the line though.
Here's the good news. Our whole offense is built around the run game and like 5 to 10 yard passes. That's going to play well in 8-degree weather in Green Bay. Like, we don't need hero ball Jimmy. We just need him to throw the ball over the middle, and he does that extremely well, maybe better than anybody in the league. So, yeah, I mean, look, I'm nervous. He almost gave the game away against the Cowboys, but we get to run the ball and have our defense go out there and give the Packers trouble. I feel good about it. We've stomped them in the playoffs the last couple times we played them too. So.
It'll be interesting. They have the extra week off, which this season, as much as any, is going to help, especially given the injuries that we've seen in the league. So I'm curious. I'm hopeful because I'm not really rooting for Green Bay to do that well either.
Well, we shall see. In that, now we will pivot this podcast away from its typical NFL discussions into Ultimate Frisbee. So it's been a little bit of an eventful time when I was away, but not in a positive way, unfortunately, Keith. We've had some Omicron effects. And so we find out earlier this week that the beach world championships that were scheduled for April in Los Angeles have been canceled. Not really specifically due to COVID, but rather due to teams not committing to paying the money to come. And I think you can understand why that is. We'll get into that, but also USA Ultimate announcing that they have postponed the start of the college season until late February, which basically means they're not going to be counting any rankings or having games count towards anything until at least the end of February. They will still sanction tournaments, but the games will not count.
I do think a lot of people who are in the weeds on this kind of stuff do almost think of sanctioning as synonymous with rankings, because we kind of think of, an unsanctioned tournament, it's a tournament where the games don't count.
That's a good point.
And sanctioned. That's not actually what those two things, they're not literally parallels, but they're not interchangeable. But so in this case, I my understanding is that sanctioning probably has more to do with like insurance and stuff like that than it does with rankings in this case.
Right. Well, in a normal season, if you play in a sanctioned tournament during the season, then the games count.
Right.
Now, you're right that they're not exactly related because the sanctioning process does have to do with, sending in the right paperwork, paying for insurance, etc.
You can play, like, for example, there are sometimes sanctioned tournaments during the fall, which obviously do not count towards the rankings.
Correct. Or you could have a sanctioned club tournament right now that would obviously not have any effect on rankings. So that's where things are. It's going to be a little bit of a slow start again here in 2022, although so far there have not been any announced cancellations of college tournaments. In fact, I just talked to the TD of Santa Barbara Invite. That tournament's moving forward. I think he said that right now there's 13 men's teams and 6 women's teams committed to coming. We'll see where those numbers end up by next weekend. That's kind of typically the big kickoff tournament to start the year. We also know that Florida warm-up looks like it's going to basically run at normal full steam ahead capacity with a big team list announcement this week on Twitter. And so, no big cancellations of any college tournaments to this point, although I wouldn't be surprised if we saw lighter fields, both because of, restrictions from universities, but also because, well, now the games don't count.
And these types of tournaments, these early season events, you think of SBI and in some years, Florida Winter Classic, Florida Warm Up, Pres Day. These types of tournaments act as like the few opportunities for connectivity. Queen City Tune Up to some degree as well. These are the connective tissue of the rankings until late in the year when we get into Stanford Invite, Eastern's, Northwest Challenge. So if teams are not traveling, which is what I expect for many of these events, you're going to see reduced long distance travel from teams. You're talking about SBI. Usually they get two to three notable teams from the eastern half of the country in both divisions. I don't think we're going to see that type of thing this year. But it may, that's obviously not going to be a big impact on the rankings, given that there won't be any at this point in time. So I'll be curious to see how the back end of once the rankings count, like what that does to creating connectivity and giving us enough data to feed into the algorithm, which we know can be fickle when it's still hungry.
All right. You know this if you're a Fuller Plus subscriber and you're in the UltiWorld Discord, but I am not a fan of this decision from USA Ultimate. I understand completely the motivation to not feel like they're coercing teams to play at a point when they're not comfortable yet playing because of COVID. So, saying, hey, full regular season as normal, everything the same, there may be teams out there that are like, we don't really want to go play a tournament yet, but we know we need to get to 10 games. We need to, do our part in order to try to earn a bid. And they go and play maybe before they feel comfortable. So on that front, I totally understand USA Ultimate's thinking. However, this, as I think we saw from college nationals, there is not significant risk to college-aged students who are, by and large, vastly in the ultimate Frisbee world, vaccinated and boosted from COVID. And there is clearly demand to play tournaments. So now we're in this situation where tournaments are going to move forward, in many cases with fairly large normal fields, and these games are going to happen, and they're not going to count. Why? That makes no sense to me. If you want to let teams feel like, hey, we don't need to go travel yet, we want to kind of like wait for things to calm down as with respect to Omicron, just reduce the number of games required to, be eligible for earning a bid. Normally it's 10. Maybe in this year you make it 5 or you make it 7. Most teams get to 7 games in one tournament. And you know what? You could always revisit that later and say, hey, we're scrapping it completely. But instead, we're in this situation where now there's going to be tournaments. Teams want to play them. They're going to go with their normal college teams. They're going to play the games, and the results, which are totally meaningful, are not going to count. And they announced that they're postponing the season, which really they're not. They're just not counting the rankings. So I feel like this is like a move that is right a year ago and not today. And I'm not happy. I think that this hurts the college division, and it's going to make getting a meaningful, set of rankings out very difficult. And I feel like there's no reason for that. Are we going to have to revert to doing something for bids like we did in the fall? I mean, I think that made sense for fall 2021. But if you're going to see, bad teams at nationals again in 2022, despite the fact that teams are playing, I just don't think that makes any sense.
Is that what you expect the impact to potentially be here? Are you opening up the doors for there to be to incorrectly assess the college season when we get down to assigning bids? Is that your concern?
100%. I also just think that it's because you're going to have most teams are not going to get to 10 games, or like many will not anyway. And it's going to open the door because they're going to have to reduce the requirement from 10. I would be shocked if they didn't do that. So then you're going to have teams who play one tournament, get to the minimum, and let's say they go to a tournament where they just mop up on bad teams. We see it every year early in the college rankings, strange teams in the top 10 because they played one tournament, there's no connectivity, and so those results float to the top. That's for sure going to happen. I mean, I don't know to what extent, but I think it's gonna mess the rankings up, certainly more so than if they used all of this game data that's going to come in over the next 2 months. But I also just think that like it's not really, it's overly cautious in a world where people are beginning to like resume normal activities. And again, I don't know how many times I have to say it on this podcast. It's an outdoor sport. And again, I understand that they don't want to coerce teams to play before they feel comfortable. But to some extent, like there's clearly many, many, many teams that are comfortable. And so now we're just not counting those games, and we're postponing the season for a month and a half for what feels to me like no real tangible benefit.
I do think that USAU is taking a very cautious approach, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's obviously influenced by what happened at the Winter College Championships. There were certainly questions about that after the event happened. Should we have been more cautious because of this potential outcome? And I think people, they caught some backlash for that. And I imagine that's informing some of their decision making here, even though I'm sure they would never, come out and say that sort of thing. And ultimately, I'm not sure that I'm entirely swayed that, preserving the rankings necessarily of a college season is really the meaningful thing about it. Like, I do love having a competitive, meaningful regular season in college. It's one of the things that I think makes college ultimate exciting as a fan. But for the participants who the season is mostly about, I don't know that it's going to have a really substantial impact on the majority of teams that are going to be competing during the college season. For the, 10 teams, 15 teams that are in the bubble around, maybe we can go to nationals. Like, this may have an impact on their season.
Hey,
that's
there's
possible.
Bids to regionals too, Keith. I know we don't talk about them much on the podcast, but that's also part of the ranking system.
It is. We bring up every year, we bring up my conference championships loving article. And that's a big part of your conference experience is how many bids to regionals do you have and how did you get them? I am unsure of how many events are happening, between the margin, away from the SBIs and the Florida warm-ups, the tournaments that teams fly to. I mean, most tournaments are not like that. Teams are driving a couple hours to go to most tournaments that I think we see in the community of College Ultimate. So I'm curious how many of those types of events are going on. I know as a coach that my team has had trouble finding events early in the season. So I think the season in some ways already felt like it was going to be delayed in a kind of de facto way outside of these big major events. I'm starting to see events come up now, and most of them felt like they were around the time of February 25th. That was as early as our team was going to be able to find events anyway. So, maybe that's part of the counter argument is like, oh, well, some teams really don't get to play until mid to late February anyway, because they're in Wisconsin or whatever, and there's nowhere to play prior to that. And so we do this every year. Is it the end of the world? I don't know. I see where you're coming from, but I also understand why USA Ultimate wants to take the most cautious route, because it's not really going to punish that many teams or have that big an effect on the season, I don't think.
I will say this. You may be right. Perhaps it ends up not mattering all that much. By the way, we've had some College Ultimate. Florida Winter Classic. It was Florida teams only, one day. Florida State went 4-0. Seminole ladies continuing to play well after their big fall kind of coming out party back onto the national stage, making the push to nationals.
Where's my heart, though, to hear about college results? Yeah,
right. They had the 3 easy wins, and then they beat Florida 10-8. I think it's really this, I feel like college teams have been so beaten down over the last 2 years by the pandemic. We lose the whole second half of the season in 2020. They can't have a national championship. I mean, what can you do? Pandemic. 2021 comes around. Colleges are not letting teams travel. And I mean, USA Ultimate kind of said the same thing at the beginning of 2021. They're like, we'll sanction tournaments. And there were like a couple maybe, but almost nothing. And that's even as people are starting to get vaccinated. But, people couldn't really travel. So now we come back to the fall tournament, and there's tournaments. We have regionals, and most teams participate, and and people who didn't participate made a choice more, I think generally more because they just didn't feel like they wanted to go to regionals, as opposed to feeling like, oh, we're totally uncomfortable playing at this point. I don't know. I shouldn't speak for teams because I'm sure there were different motivations across the board. But, we had a relatively normal college championships, all things considered. And I feel like teams are so ready for the return to a normal season. And then, boom, immediately, it's not a normal season again. And that's just got to be extremely frustrating. And the thing is, I don't think it's justified to again hit the competitive structure of the season significantly by ignoring all of these game results that are going to take place and have already started taking place, given that clearly teams are comfortable traveling, want to go play, and are choosing to do so. So what is the benefit of not counting these games and saying that you're postponing the season, which just by saying that alone is going to have a deterring effect on people actually getting out and starting to play? That's where I'm coming from, if that makes sense.
It does. I see your point. I'm trying to look at events right now to see how many events are affected, so to speak, by this. I think that the what did I say? The National Ultimate League, the rebranded version of Ultimate, had some early events. The first Without Limits event, Commonwealth Cup, was prior to this February 25th cutoff line. And then a couple of the events that you mentioned as well. Not a ton. I still think that teams were already
Stanford
kind
Open, Mid-Atlantic
skewing
warm-up
later. Yeah, and to be clear, there's not a lot of West Coast stuff that I'm seeing here. I not because it doesn't exist, but because I don't think it's being posted in I'm looking at r/ultimate as we speak.
Got it. I'm on the play.usaultimate.org.
Perfect. Good. So we're getting all the full perspective, I guess. So I think that there was already a lot of push deeper into the year anyway. So It's unfortunate. I guess I don't necessarily know what the right decision here is. When USA Ultimate made this announcement, one thing that I thought was interesting was they said that one of their motivating factors was to create a more flexible environment for event organizers and teams to make decisions about hosting and attending an event. I don't know that necessarily actually helps. Is that flexibility in the way, you sit down with your friends or your significant other to decide what's for dinner, and you're like, hey, what do you want for dinner? And they're like, oh, I don't care. And like, I get the idea. Oh, they're leaving me all the options. It'll be so easy to make a decision. But like, that's not necessarily what you want. You want clear indication so that you can start to limit your options down to something to make an easier decision. And I think that can be true for tournament organizers too. Knowing what your dates should be can be more helpful than just having a big wide open space or the potential for things to change down the line. So I don't know if that extra flexibility actually is helpful to your side of this debate about whether or not they should have done this. I don't know that actually helps teams organize. Maybe it does. Maybe it's like, oh, we can commit to going to this tournament and it doesn't really, we won't know whether it'll go into the rankings, but it won't matter. I don't know. I don't quite get what they're going for with that, but, as it is, I don't think it's going to have a huge impact, but in this system, every game counts, even the early ones and especially the connective ones. So there are going to be some ones, Florida warm-up in particular, given the slate of teams that are going to be there, will have an impact on the men's division.
I mean, I still think we're going to get great games, and Ultiworld's going to be out filming games and reporting on events. And I mean, in my mind, the college season has started. That's what I think is frustrating. I think people are like ready to get back out and start playing College Ultimate again. What more do you need people to do? Right? I mean, obviously, this is coming from somebody I have been consistently saying since way back into even the fall of 2020 that, we are being too conservative as a sport. It's okay to play. There's no evidence of outdoor transmission. I've been on this. This is like kind of, you shouldn't be surprised that this is how I feel about this topic too. But
I'm not.
I think I'm more, I feel like there's a lot more people in this camp now who are like, no, we want to play. And so they're going to play, and then the games aren't going to count. And it's like, it feels like we're losing the season again. It just frustrates me. It frustrates me because I think we're at the point in this pandemic where we have to start to say, okay, where do we need to continue to like make decisions about, being cautious versus starting to resume our lives again.
I mean, how do you feel about some of the
caution lane?
Like, it's obviously different to cancel something like Beach Worlds, where, you have all this international travel, but like,
sure.
The World Games tryouts, those got postponed. Like, do you feel an event like given that that's happening as we speak, do you feel like that's also something that we should just run with, or do you feel like the time difference is significant in a way that makes it so they can be treated differently, or what?
I think, having taken a look at the email that went out, it seems like they're not really going to lose much of their prep time. I think, maybe you have to compress some stuff, and at some point maybe you lose a practice weekend, but I don't know. I'm not going to feel too bad if Team USA doesn't get an extra practice weekend. I think that's kind of a different scenario because you've got people flying in from all over the place into one exact spot, and like it doesn't really cost you nearly as much to wait to have the tryout in a month. And I also think it's the kind of thing where if people are saying, hey, we're not feeling comfortable yet flying to this tryout and being put up in hotels or whatever, then you have to listen to what the participants are saying. So to me, it's just a different story. And again, I think USA Ultimate saying, hey, we're going to reduce game requirements, for example, would be an example of a smart way to go about reducing the pressure on teams to compete without losing all of the like season structure that's going to be happening anyway.
And as I think we've noted on our site before through mathematical analysis, Contrary, though I don't think teams believe this, I think teams still operate from the picture of more games is better for your ranking. That is not actually true, to my understanding. Playing fewer games is generally going to be better for your ranking. So while it may feel like an unfair advantage for teams to be able to play now and be able to play over the whole season, as opposed to some teams who might have restrictions on their travel or their ability to compete, I don't think it actually is an advantage in the rankings for those teams to be able to play.
You're way more likely to be able to snag a Nationals bid by showing up to kind of an early season event and playing well at that tournament and getting outsized rankings points and then pulling a Cincinnati and not playing more games. So we don't need to get into the vagaries of the bid algorithm right now. Let's turn our attention to the World Beach Ultimate Championships getting canceled. WFDF coming out with a press release on the 18th, that's Tuesday, after taking into consideration the high number of late team withdrawals and significantly reduced income collected from teams and players registered to participate at the World Beach Ultimate Championships, WFDF and the local organizing committee have determined that the event planned for April has too few teams to be viable and therefore has been canceled. So there it is. I mean, I think this event would have moved forward had there been sufficient interest from teams, but just having kind of heard from around the grapevine, I think that there was reluctance from teams and players from overseas to travel to the United States to play at the Beach World Championships, with the World Club Championships happening just a couple of months later, also in the United States. And that, combined perhaps with uncertainty about travel restrictions or just discomfort with traveling amidst the Omicron wave, ended up having teams not putting in the money when it was finally time. And it was like, you got to put the money in. And so they canceled the event. And I mean, I talked to Grant Boyd, the TD, a week ago, maybe a week and a half, and he still seemed confident that things were going to move forward. So I think hitting the payment deadline, the chips fell where they fell, and there just wasn't enough money in the budget to make a tournament make sense.
Now Roush was just on Huck and A, our Canadian news podcast.
It was Brian Gissel, was it not?
Or Brian Gissel, excuse me. Yes, was on Huck and A. Excuse me.
I would say I highly encourage people to go listen to that episode and hear from the hosts over there and from Brian on all of this WFDF conversation. But what are your thoughts, Keith?
It's an unfortunate casualty. I wish I had a better understanding of how much of the more direct team participation decisions were based around COVID and the travel restrictions that they could be facing, or potential safety issues with traveling to a big international event, versus some of the concerns that you mentioned about the other international events on the calendar being all compressed together. Now, having that compression obviously is a function of postponements due to the pandemic. Ultimately, this all has to do with the pandemic. But I wish I knew better the decision-making process that teams were making when they were actually taking into account. How much of this would have been feasible if, for example, COVID-19, we weren't worried about it. Everybody was vaccinated and there wasn't another wave or whatever. It was fine. Would there still be teams that are like, I don't know if we can afford to travel twice to the U.S. or stay in the U.S. or whatever, or I don't know if we have people who are interested in doing it. Would that have still happened? That I feel like that's so important, getting a better sense of what was at play with this issue. But I guess I'm not completely shocked. I mean, you have to reach a critical mass, and I think that most places are going to prioritize the 7-on-7 grass format over beach formats. So
yes,
it's not a huge shock to me. And sure, the U.S. probably could have filled out a bunch of team slots, but that's not necessarily the case for everybody else.
And it's not the point of the tournament.
Yeah.
So I think if I put myself in the shoes, let's say, I live in Europe or Asia, and I'm playing in a country where, there's a relatively small playing population, and my club team got a bid to the World Club Championships and also have the opportunity to play at Beach Worlds. I'm looking at it, and I'm looking at the calendar, and I'm looking at the travel situation, and just the general cost of traveling right now it's high, and we've had price inflation, and you're thinking, okay, so am I really going to fly for a week and stay in the United States in April and then go back in July, or am I going to pick one? For me, I pick one, and I probably pick World Clubs, and I think that's what happened. A lot of people picked one, and I'm sure there's some people who just didn't feel comfortable playing or traveling yet because of COVID. Maybe just the cost of the tournament felt like it was too high, but you can understand if you live outside of North America, it's probably annoying to have to see two major WFDF tournaments be held back to back in the United States, right? So I can understand why people would be frustrated by that and not want to go to both of them. And I think, the writing was kind of on the wall for this tournament for a while. It always felt a little tenuous because of this. And so here we are.
Yeah, I agree 100%. That if I were in team shoes, I would also be prioritizing the World Club Championships. And I certainly can understand the obstacles you face when trying to travel to the U.S. twice in the same calendar year. It always felt like this was the most likely event to get the axe if one of them was going to.
Sure.
So we've already seen changes. The World Juniors got moved as well. So there's certainly some other things going on as far as teams deciding when to travel and how much to spend and where to go. So I think we got to keep our head on a swivel here. This may not be the last news that happens with WFDF. They're always going to have the most challenges, I think, because connecting people globally is a difficult thing to do, even when there's perfectly safe conditions, let alone a transmissible virus that's being handled differently by country to country on a country to country basis while simultaneously affecting every country in the world. So, WFDF was always going to have challenges putting together these types of events in these conditions, but it's just been exacerbated by the length of time, the new wave from Omicron, the compressed schedule. It's just all coming to a head.
I think this speaks to the point, though. The World Club Championships have full 128 team capacity, having paid team fees and committed. And the World Masters Championships in Ireland has 117 teams signed up, ready to play. People want to play, but I think people are still, particularly when it comes to expensive international WFDF events, are still going to be thoughtful about how much they travel in a given year. So I think that's what you're seeing here. I think it's possible you could see similar, attrition of teams, even in a non-COVID setting, if this was the schedule. April, USA, July, USA, for back-to-back big WFDF tournaments. Obviously, everything's out of whack with the calendar because of COVID. So, and they would never put back-to-back events in the United States normally. But I think the goal was we want to make this tournament happen. Beach Worlds was supposed to happen in 2020. They punted. Was it 2020? And then they punted twice? Or was it 2021? Now I can't remember. Anyway, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So hopefully future WFDF tournaments are able to go on unencumbered. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we've got some College Player of the Year chatter. And what else we got? Oh, some semi-pro signings to talk about. So stay with us. You're listening to Deep Look. Welcome back to Deep Look. Well, with the 2021 College Championships now a couple weeks behind us, it's award season. And the Player of the Year awards have been announced in both Division 1 and Division 3. Keith, want to quickly break down for us the 4 winners, and then we'll discuss.
Absolutely. Division 3, we already have had those come out. We've actually had pretty much the full award slate with All-Americans for Division 3 come out in D3 Women's. I don't think it was anybody's surprise. I mean, I remember saying it during the broadcast, but Claire Babbitt Bryant from Middlebury took home the Player of the Year award. Kyle Henke did so in the men's division. So the leaders of each of the respective champions. We just had our Player of the Year awards in D1 come out, and it was actually the opposite. It was, rather than the champions, it was actually a team that the champions beat that each put a Player of the Year representative at the top of the podium. In women's, that's Abby Hecko from Washington. In men's, that's Hayden Austin Nab from Georgia. And then on each podium, I should note, in both men's and women's in D1, 2 North Carolina players in the runner-up positions, which that's got to be a first.
It's almost unheard. I would wonder, Keith, if we have the data, have we ever had multiple players from the same team on a college podium, or really any podium?
I know for a fact that we've had them on the same podium once when the Ohio State women, the year that Cassie Swafford and Paige Soper finished like 1-2.
Yeah, one Player of the Year and one Callahan.
Yeah. And it wasn't. Yeah, it was 2 different players who did that. So that's very unusual.
That was a great team. What a great college team.
Indeed. So it's happened, but it is certainly infrequent. And I really don't think we've ever had a situation where 2 runners up were from the same team. 2 years ago, also Mac Hecht won, and John Randolph was second runner up. So those might be the only instances of players from the same team appearing on the POTY podium. That is, in fact, I believe, the only instances that has happened.
All right. Well, there you go. I mean, it all makes sense. You could imagine that Stubbs and Vandenberg could have done it, right? It's often these like really 2 really strong players that are like playing a lot together when you typically see this kind of thing come up. The thing about UNC on really both sides is that you could probably pick 3 or 4 players that have at least a case for being on the podium. That's how good those teams were. And, I just put in my mailbag odds for UNC championship repeats. And I mean, I think UNC Pleiades is a heavy favorite. I think UNC men are probably still the favorite in the betting odds, but not quite as heavily a favorite as the women's side. But either way, I mean, just tons of talent. But let's talk.
While you're bringing that up, though, this came up on the last show and we forgot to address it, but I did tweet about it. I am open to taking the field plus 300 against the UNC women.
Okay. We will make an arrangement off the air. Sound good?
Yeah. I'm in. Not because I don't believe, like, they definitely are the favorite. I would definitely have them at minus odds, which is still pretty wild, but I think 300 is generous.
Okay. All right. So we're going to go into much further detail about our thoughts on the POTY podiums and the Players of the Year in D1 in our subscriber bonus segment. So we hope you'll become a subscriber to check that out. ultiworld.com/subscribe. It's less than $4 a month to get access to all of our bonus episodes here on the Deep Look podcast, as well as all of our other podcasts. But just quick thoughts, obviously 4 tremendously talented players. I think it was an easy call in D3 for Babbitt Bryant and Henke to win. Best player, best team, and like also just the best player at the tournament. So like that makes it easy. Less so, I think, in D1, where you had credible nominees from a couple of teams and ultimately neither champion team getting a POTY winner. But I think, you look at the success of the teams that reached the final and their individual impact on those teams. It's easy for me to see why those players won.
Incredibly talented players, obviously, and a lot to parse through. And I know as somebody who was participating in those conversations, like it definitely felt hard this year with so little information. You know, it's just like,
sure,
not even do you not have like more than just a tournament basically, but like, you know, those players aren't necessarily playing in every game, especially the top end teams. You know, maybe players are resting. You have players who are leaving with injury. So it was really challenging this year to feel like we got a complete picture. It felt a little bit more like we were using snapshots than usual, but I do think we came up with a list of pretty talented players, and I'll be interested to get more of your thoughts when we get to the subscriber bonus segment.
All right, let's turn our attention to the semi-pro leagues. It is certainly that time of year when players are starting to make their signing decisions about whether they'll be playing for the 2022 season. And the big news this week, #BreakTheStreak is real, Keith. The Detroit Mechanics have signed Johnny Bansfield for the 2022 season. It will be his first time playing with the team since 2017. So he is back, and you have to think, Keith, this bodes extremely well for Detroit's chances of finally getting off the schneid and getting a W. It has been many years.
I hope he has more of an impact than, like, remember we got excited about Joe White joining Chicago Union?
Well, he never played.
Yeah, I know. I hope the Mansfield does
I guess
better
that's the
than
point.
You didn't like #ban the streak? I like the riding the Bansfield name. And then once they win a game, they can do #build the streak, because now they want to build the win streak.
No, you don't want to get going with that until you've won at least 3 games in a row.
I mean, 2 games is technically a streak, right? So at least 2. But yeah, it's, you know, it's exciting. We've all had our fun, you know, making fun of the Mechanics. It's also been even enjoyable to hear our Alex Rubin from Stall 7. They're rooting for the Mechanics to pull out that W. And I think in some way we all are. Like, we all want them to get there. But they've fallen well short on so many occasions. But it's been such a big year for Michigan Ultimate. So, like, why not? I think with the success of hybrid in the club mixed division, both the Michigan women's and men's teams reach nationals. The men's team has a great run. You know, it feels like it has a bit of a high tide for the Michigan Ultimate scene, and this could be a chance for the Mechanics to add on to that, to extend that streak.
There is no reason that a Michigan-based AUDL team cannot be successful in the Midwest Division. I will say that. I think, you know, are they going to be a Final Four team? Probably not. But there's plenty of talent in Michigan to put together a highly competitive team that can win games in that division. 100%. The problem is the franchise has been run poorly for a long time. They burned a lot of bridges back in the day, and you have to start somewhere to start repairing those things. And I think that this signing and Bansfield coming back to play after 5 years is a sign that probably things are moving in the correct direction here. Or maybe they just threw a ton of money at him.
I mean,
possible.
Having that player can be attractive to other good players. Like, we know this.
Exactly.
Exactly. It's an important domino for them.
That is the key, because you need to have somebody where it's like other players go, oh, okay, like, we're going to do this now. And I won't be surprised to see them sign some more notable players, because, you know, they have a lot of young talent, and the younger generation doesn't know anything about probably the history of the franchise or what was going on in 2012, 2013, 2014. And I think that the younger generation in general is growing up and coming up into Ultimate at a time where semi-pro Ultimate is like a part of the landscape in a way that, you know, players our age, Keith, are, you know, they knew about a time when it didn't exist. And there's more allegiance to Club Ultimate. So it'll be interesting to see what happens from here in terms of Detroit. Otherwise, the signings are mostly what you would expect. A couple of notable 3-year deals. AJ Merriman signing with the DC Breeze for 3 years, coming off his incredible campaign with DC. And Jack Williams signing for 3 years with the New York Empire. You know, I think but both great signings for their respective teams. Jack Williams, I think, is poised to be like the best player in Ultimate for a couple years here. So to me, that's the highest impact signing we've seen this season, even if it's the one you would have expected to see. Indeed,
just easily a consensus top 5, if not top 3 player in the men's division. So he's going to be a threat to win the MVP pretty much anytime he can get in a healthy season. Is obviously the face of that Empire team, along with Ben Yacht, who also signed a new deal. I never really know like what it means to sign a deal. Like, I wish we had a better sense of that. Otherwise, right now, I think it's just kind of like a fancy rostering, where
commitment signaling.
Yeah, it's like we want to market ourselves like we're a real sports team, like a real sports league, and they would announce a signing this way rather than the way that club teams just like dump their roster scrawled out in crayon. If you're some teams, if we're lucky to get a roster, you know who you are. If I'm calling you out right now, but I don't mind having these nice graphics with the signings or whatnot, but without knowing the terms of anything, I think they're very informal. Like, what if AJ Merriman gets a job in San Francisco next year? Like, what's he going to do? Have to buy out his
contract? There's going to be a trade. DC trades AJ Merriman to the San Jose Spiders in return for a 6-pack of beers when DC comes to the championship week.
So it's a bit of a strange thing to me. I do, however, I've long said that like I wish people would hype their teammates, and I appreciate that this hypes individuals up. We never see club teams doing this except for Flood did it this past year. I wish club teams would be like, hey, so and so's coming back this year, but I guess it's just not really how it works. So I like the hype. Don't get me wrong.
I will say weird. This. I hear you. I will say this. I think some players are actually getting enough money for it to be at least somewhat meaningful. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if Jack Williams' contract is like not bad. Like worth 5 figures. I don't know. But we're getting to the point where particular players in particular franchises are able to actually command some money. And I actually think this is a very interesting and rich potential area for reporting, because we haven't seen any of this stuff publicly mentioned, but we know that, for example, some New York Empire players get housing as a part of their contract with the team. That's worth a lot of money in the New York metro area, even if you're living up in Westchester County. I mean, I don't know what you'd peg it at, but it's worth at least $15,000 a year, if not more than that. So I think we're at the point where it's starting to have some meaning, but you're right, Keith. If a player moves out of the city, that's then it's just okay. Your contract is broken. I think the bigger thing is I'll be interested when for the first time we see a player sign with a team where they don't live or plan to live for the season. Now, we've seen Montreal do this, right? With some of the European players who come over and stay in Montreal during the season. And
the Wind Chill, I think, did it with some of the Canadian players who came over there, right?
But that was at least like driving distance kind of thing, coming from Winnipeg.
This didn't happen with the Dallas teams?
It did happen with the Dallas teams. Okay. That's a great point. But that, that was like a kind of like a short-lived experiment for the most part. San Diego also was flying in Kurt Gibson for a time. But like, we haven't seen it lately, and in a time when the AUDL has been a little bit more mature as an organization. So we'll see. Right now, it's mostly teams signing players who live in the city that you would expect to be on the team, and were on the team last year.
Yeah. In fact, I want to actually break some news here. I will be signing with Ultiworld for 2022 for
big news.
My salary, and with a player option for 2023. So I've joined the organization. I'm back. Everybody, don't worry. Big 2022 coming. Full commitment.
We're gonna get the graphics team on this right away, so we can blast it out on socials.
Well, brief shout out to our graphics team. If you have not been, if you for some reason are a dang fool and are not following us on Twitter and Instagram, you are missing out on some. Our graphics team is pumping out some awesome awards graphics for our awards winners. So definitely check that out. It's been super cool. But yes, we should get them on my signing. Yeah, there were also a smattering of signings in the Western Ultimate League and Premier Ultimate League. The Indy Red are starting to announce some of their players that are coming back for this year. We saw some players for the new Oregon Onyx, including Claudia Tajima and Danielle Runzo, who are going to be back for them or joining them, I guess. So you're seeing a little bit. I don't think we've seen any multi-year deals per se in the Premier Ultimate League or Western Ultimate League yet. I don't know if that's really where they're going to go with this. And like the ADL have never disclosed the nature of their deals, nor do they have anybody from outside of the like general area, like people you would already expect to be playing for those teams. So mostly it's just pretty roster announcements for now, but that's been the case across pretty much the entire arena of roster announcements for these pro leagues, semi-pro leagues.
Yeah. And, until further notice, I expect that to be kind of like that. Disc golf is going through a time where contracts had previously been very informal and generally not for all that much money in most cases. And now they're getting very formal as people are signing multi-million-dollar contracts with disc manufacturers as an endorsement. So, obviously, when you're talking about that kind of money, the legal paperwork gets a lot more significant. I would imagine that maybe someday we'll get there in Ultimate as well.
Now, there could be a little more intrigue, I guess, in the Premier Ultimate League and Western Ultimate League where there are fewer teams. So there are more players who might want to participate in the league, but are not able to because they don't have a local team.
Who don't have a team in their city.
And there are fewer games, so it's easier to commit to playing with a team. Finally, there's also an international team who has a history of attracting talent from the U.S. So you always want to keep your eye out for what's going to happen with Medellin Revo Pro, given their history of signing like really top level talent. And
we've seen some Colorado talent in the Western Ultimate League trickling down to Arizona and to Utah.
Yes, Ari Nelson signing with the Sidewinders. So
right.
There is a potential for there to be a little more of the kind of like traveling element in those leagues where there's a more dispersal and less opportunity nearby.
Okay, here's a question. With the AUDL adding Oregon, Denver, and Salt Lake in 2022, what major metro needs a team that doesn't have one? Because like what you're describing doesn't really exist in the AUDL as much at this point. Like most of the major cities have a team, or maybe major areas, like Texas has 2 teams and like Houston doesn't have a team, but Houston probably shouldn't get a team.
Right.
So what major metro still should get a team if you're going to have it be like fully comprehensive for like elite ultimate hubs?
I don't know that there is one where there isn't necessarily crossover unless you go into Canada, where there have been teams previously, but
Vancouver.
No Vancouver right now.
Sure.
That's the only one that really pops to mind for me.
Kansas City.
I mean, Kansas had they haven't sent a team to nationals even, right?
That's true. It's been a long time since it's a tier 2 city, but I think like it's got enough to be competitive in the
tier 2 feels high for me.
You think tier 3?
Yeah, I mean, if you're tier 1 are the major ultimate hubs, then tier 2 is going to be that like we are consistently present at in major events. Like if tier 1 is San Francisco and Raleigh and Boston, I guess then tier 2 is like Pittsburgh,
because Kansas City United didn't make nationals, right?
No.
So
Prairie Fire didn't make it, right? I don't think so.
I don't think they ever made it.
Right. So
they were like the last team out.
I'm not saying that everybody in Kid City stinks or anything. I'm just saying that there's not a history of great success for that area for men's ultimate.
Sure. I mean, Vancouver's the obvious answer. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Maybe not.
Yeah, there's no like Arizona team, but it's not like they have a ton of history.
Albuquerque. There it is.
What I want to see is the Salt Lake team sign some out of state pull. People want to play. Maybe people want to start playing with Utah instead of them being so insular.
It could happen. They've locked up a bunch of talent that had kind of dispersed to other AUDL teams. They're going to be competitive. It's going to be interesting to watch that team. Anyway, We'll keep an eye on the hot stove and Ultimate as players make their signing decisions over the next few weeks, and tryouts are starting soon for a lot of teams. Some tryouts have been delayed due to Omicron, so we'll see what happens on that front.
That's another thing about Ultimate that's not quite like traditional sports. Not a lot of teams holding tryouts to fill out most of the roster.
That is true. More teams should do it. Just open tryouts. Does the NFL still have some open like walk-on tryouts? I think there's ways to get that.
What's the movie about the garbage man who becomes the kicker for the Eagles?
I don't remember the name of the movie, but
that's a real story, right? That really happened. So.
Exactly. All right. That is going to do it for this edition of Deep Look. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be talking about Player of the Year awards, what we agree with, what we disagree with in our subscriber bonus segment. So we'll see you over there. For Keith Raynor, I'm Charlie Eisenhood saying so long, and we'll talk to you next week right here on Deep Look.